All right, welcome to SDM and DHCP server configuration part 2. Now this is going to pick up right where the previous video left off, where we just finished configuring the router to support SSH and SDM, and now it's time to do something with it. We're going to get into the SDM and configure DHCP, but before we do that, I do want to give you a brief overview, kind of a review from the beginning of this series of what DHCP is, what it's used for, and why it's so beneficial. DHCP is the acronym for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. It's an automated way to give your devices IP addresses on the local area network. So, for example, I've got this little mini network right here. There's two ways I could go about giving my devices IP addresses. One would be manually, meaning I go to each and every device and manually type in the IP address, and the other is automatic. If we chose the manual route, let me show you. I've just got a connection over here to a Windows Vista machine. I'm going to come up here and go to Network, and I usually shortcut my way around. I right-click on Network and go to Properties. Vista has a few more steps than some of the previous operating systems like Windows XP. Over here you have Manage Network Connections. I choose that, and I see my two network connections that are available to me, the wireless, and I have my local area connection. So I would right click on, let's say I want to assign it to my local area connection, LAN connection, the Ethernet interface. Right click on that and go to properties, and I can see that I have the TCP/IP protocol version 4. Double click on that, and I can either choose obtain an IP address automatically, which says go get it via DHCP server, or manually. This is how I would go in and type in, I want this to be, 192.168 1.92 or something, and give it the subnet mask and default gateway and all of those settings. Now that's doing it for one PC, but imagine doing it for hundreds of PC that's sitting on your network. That's why DHCP is so advantageous, is we can just set up a pool of IP addresses that are handed out from either a server or a router or a switch or wherever we decide to have our DHCP server. Now, DHCP addresses are usually given for a limited time, meaning that when you set this up, you'll say, well, they get this IP address for 8 days unless they ask for it again, meaning you let them borrow IP addresses. Maybe it's 2 days, maybe it's 5 hours. You let them borrow IP addresses as long as they're actively using it, and if they aren't using it anymore, it goes back into the pool. That gives you the benefit of, if you shut a computer down and take it off the network to some other network, it doesn't steal that IP address permanently. Likewise, you can have it manually allocated from a DHCP server. That's why I'm saying manually allocated, meaning I can go to a DHCP server, which could be my router, and say, when you see a device come in with the MAC address 00A011213391, when that device comes and asks you for an IP address, make sure you always give them 192.168.1.100. Now, the benefit of doing that is you can go to even your servers and say, well, I don't want to manually put an IP address on them. I'll set them up for DHCP, but you don't want your server's IP address to change. So you can go to the DHCP server that's handing out those addresses and say, let's put in the server's MAC address and make sure that you give them that one. So it's a way of dynamically, manually assigning an IP address, manually giving one without manually typing it in. Finally, I mentioned DHCP servers can be server-based, which means you can have a Windows server that hands them out, or router-based. There's advantages to both. One, the router is far more stable than a Windows server, so there's less chance of the router crashing. The advantage of using the Windows server is usually it's a lot easier to work with, meaning there's graphic interfaces to set it up with, and it's graphically oriented. So if you want to see who has what IP address, you can just go to a GUI and go click, click. Oh, I see them right there. So for a lot of Microsoft admins, that's a lot more appealing than having to learn a little bit about Cisco. Because of that, Microsoft is usually the way people will go in their mainstream networks to set up their DHCP services. Before we get into the configuration, let me just show you the DHCP process that a client goes through to get an IP address. When you go into your client and set it up to automatically get an IP address, what it will do is send out a DHCP broadcast onto the wire. Now, you've got your switch sitting right in the middle here that either connects to the server or to the router or your DHCP device. So it will send out a broadcast because it doesn't have an IP address. It's going to just broadcast saying, hello, anybody. I need an IP address. That's known as a DHCP Discover packet. And if you use Wireshark and actually open a packet sniffer, you'll be able to see a packet labeled DHCP Discover come through. Now, if you have more than one DHCP server on the network, everybody gets it because it's a broadcast. So it will come back and say, here is my offer. And that is a unicast message that is directed straight to that PC's MAC address. It says, here is my offer of an IP address for you. Now, this PC will get that and look at it and go, okay, looks good to me. You know, you're giving me the IP address 192.168.1.53. You know what? I don't have one, so that looks great. I will accept that, and that is the response. It's a unicast message now instead of a broadcast saying, I accept your offer. I will respond with my request saying, you know, thank you for this, and I will use this. This sends back an acknowledgement saying, got it. I have now assigned you that IP address, and I will add that to my database. So now the computer realizes this is a assignment. It is good. I can now begin using this IP address to communicate. With those foundations in place, let's use the SDM to configure our router as a DHCP server. Now, before we do, I'm going to make sure that I can keep the preview commands on so that we can see the iOS commands that it's going to use to do this before we send them through. So I'm going to click on the configure button right up here. Let me scoot this up so we can see the whole real estate. And I can see, you know, the configure. We've got our interfaces, firewalls, VPNs, and so on. The DHCP server is located down at the bottom under additional tasks. It's kind of hidden. And this is where all the miscellaneous tasks go that don't have their specific mapping in these buttons. And you can see the router properties like the host name, domain name, and we can change all those. But I'm interested in this DHCP folder right here. I click the plus sign and I can see DHCP pools, which lets me configure the pools, and the bindings, which will show me the manual assignments where I can go in and say, I want to give this MAC address, this IP address, and so on. I can add in my manual bindings there. So I'm going to go to the pool first off and configure a pool. I'll click on add. Brings up my little GUI here where I can go through and say, well, what do you want to name the pool? And I'll call this LAN addresses. Says, what is the network? I will say the network is 192.168.1.0. The subnet mask for that network is 255.255.255.0. This is saying what IP addresses would you like to hand out? Now it says the pool itself, give me the range of addresses that you want to hand out. I mean, do you just want to start from, you know, 1 and hand out? And I said, well, no, because I usually, when I set up my scope, of what I want to hand out, I usually will start from 192.168.1. I usually start from 20 or 30 because 1 through 10 or 1 through 20, I usually use for my servers, meaning the stuff that have static addresses or ones I manually assign on my network. I don't just want to hand those out in a rotating range. And I'll say I never expect my LAN to grow above 80 devices, so I'll go all the way up to 192.168.1.100. Now it comes up and says, well, how long do you want to assign these addresses? Do you want to say never expires? That's a dangerous one. So as soon as you hand out that IP address, that computer will use it forever. Or do you want to expire after a certain number of days? Maybe I'll put 0 days, but I want it to expire once every 5 hours. I could do that. Or maybe I'll say just 3 days. Once every 3 days, I want to take it back if the client is no longer using it. Now, if the client still remains on, meaning their computer's always running, the client will automatically come in at about a day and a half and say, hey, I'm still using it, and it'll get a fresh 3-day lease on the IP address, so it will keep using it from there, you know, for the next 3 days and so on. So it's not like it's going to get yanked away after 3 days and say, sorry, you're expired. So I'll say after 3 days, if it's not being used, go ahead and expire. And then down here I have my options, like what is the DNS server that you would like them to use? Well, there is a well-known DNS server on the internet that a lot of people know about. It's a well-known address, 4.2.2.2.2. By the way, if you're ever looking for a way to test your internet connectivity, that is a great IP address to ping to make sure you're getting there. 4.2.2.2, and you can see there's a reply. It's just a public DNS server. I believe a university owns it, and they just let whoever want to use it use it. Or you can use whatever DNS server your service provider, internet service provider has given you, or maybe you even have a DNS server on your internal network that you'd like to use. Whatever you'd like to do, totally up to you. It says, what is the domain name? Now, when you set up an IP address or you set up a computer to use an IP address, you can see that I can go into the network. Let me open this back up again. Go to the properties. I'll hit manage network connections. Go to my LAN connection. And it shows, you know, what IP address do you want, what DNS server. You can click on this advanced button right here. And under DNS, one of the things that you can set up is the DNS suffix. Meaning I can type in a domain suffix that I'd like to use. For example, I could put, like my domain that I use at home is home.local. And I click on add. And you can see add that domain name to whatever address I ping. Now, I'm showing you adding this or what that DNS name is. Let me explain what it does. What it does is when I go to a command prompt or I love Vista. Where's my run? I go to a command prompt. If I were to type in ping, for instance, win2003, it will automatically add onto that home.local because that's my domain name. Or I type in ping adtech. That's another server I have here at my home. It will automatically add on adtech.home.local. It puts whatever domain name I choose to add in. And let me find my window again. Whatever domain name I add here to whatever name I type in there. So for instance, I have servers in my home that is like win2003.home.local, adtech.home.local, exchange.home.local. But instead of having people type in all of that home.local on the end of everything, I can just say, well, put home.local on the end of everything. And that's what the domain name does. Now, the other big one is the default router. That's essentially the default gateway that the client's going to use to get off of the network onto the internet. So I'm going to type in 192.168.1.1, which is the IP address of this router, the 851 series router. And then it has this option that says import all DHCP options into the DHCP server database. That's a confusing one. What that does, let me go to the whiteboard. I'm going to go over here. I've got this, this router that is connected to the internet. And this is connected to a switch. Sorry, it's not that pretty. But it's connected to a switch which reaches my PC. Now, here's the idea of that DHCP options. Let's say my internet service provider assigns me an address dynamically using DHCP to my router's interface, the public interface that connects to the internet right here. Well, when they give me an IP address, they might give me a DNS server, and they might give me, you know, Win server, or, you know, all kinds of other options might come, or domain name might come from my internet service provider and is assigned to my router interface right here. Well, what this option right here says is import those from your DHCP address. So for example, if they assign me from my ISP the DNS server 4.2.2.2, or another one is 4.2.2.3, you know, I can say just import that and automatically assign that to your clients. So that way, I don't even have to type this in. I could just, you know, wipe that out, and the router will automatically import what the service provider is giving it and assign that to all of its clients. Does that make sense? So you know, maybe they assign me a DNS server. I don't even know what it is. Well, I can just forward that on and give that to all of the clients without having to know that. So that's what that option does. I'll keep it checked. It's checked by default, and click on OK. Now check this out. With our click, 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 and fill in the boxes, what it's going to deliver to the router is from global config, it's going to create a command called IPDHCP pool LAN addresses. Underneath there, it's going to set up all of the options that I typed in. Those are the exact commands it's going to feed to the iOS so that the iOS is configured to hand out things from that network, to hand out that domain name, to give it that DNS server, this default gateway, import all those from the service provider, and lease for 3 days. Now down below, you can see it created in global config mode to exclude commands, which keeps it from handing out 1 through 19 and 101 to 254, because that's how the router handles just handing out specific IP addresses. In my case, I said hand out 20 to 100, so it just excluded it from handing it out to everything else. Looks good. I'll click on deliver. You see how this preview can really help you learn iOS? You know what you wanted to do using the GUI. This will show you the commands to do it using the iOS. I just love that feature. Click on deliver. It says, I have now submitted 10 commands to the router. Please wait. Click on OK. Thank you very much, SDM. We now have a DHCP server set up. Now this PC right here is plugged in to that router, and right now the LAN port is trying to get an IP address. Now just so you know, I'm managing this computer remotely through its wireless connection, so that's how we're able to see all this. I'm not actually sitting on this computer right now. So I'm going to go to a command prompt. Oh, actually I've got one open down here. Might as well do that. And type in ipconfig/renew. That is the command to tell this computer to go out and get a new IP address for any interfaces that are set up for DHCP. Oh, look at that. Beauty. You can ignore this one up here. This is my wireless connection. That's how I'm managing this computer remotely. But look at this. Oh, give me a highlighter here. Hang on. It feels better if you highlight it. Oh, yeah. Ethernet connection, LAN connection, local area connection. Domain name, home.local. Looks good. Look at its IP address, 192.168.1.20. That was the first one from the range that we just set up. It's going to start with the range. Its default gateway, 192.168.1.1. Sweet. So that is set up. It's getting an IP address from the server. Let's go back to the SDM right here, and I can look at the DHCP, right here. DHCP pool status. I click on that, and it brings up this little window saying this IP address has been reached, or at least 192.168.1.20. Let me go to, I do too many things on the fly. I'm just not set up to do. I'm going to telnet over to that router. And give me a sec. Bring that into the window so we can see it. Log in. And notice I'm on the CBT router. I'm going to type in a command, show IP DHCP binding, and hit enter. And right there, I can see it gave, this, by the way, this is from the router's perspective. I'm saying, show me all the IP addresses that you've handed out, or the ones, the binding database. I can see that it handed out 192.168.1.20 to this PC, the one with that MAC address right there. 0.100 and so on. It says lease expiration. I don't have, let me type in show clock. You can see that my clock is way off. I need to set the clock because it thinks it's March of 2002, and it's saying that'll expire in March 5th, 2002, and it was handed out automatically. Now, just for grins, because I do these kind of things, let's look at this. I can see, I'm going to type in ipconfig/all, which shows me all the information. Let me scroll up to my LAN interface. This is my LAN connection, and I can see the MAC address for the LAN connection is 0015C5AF. Let's go back over here to our SDM. Oh, wait, nope. To our telnet session, and right there I can see that is the MAC address I handed out, 0015, and it does things a little different in the iOS. That's the actual MAC address right there, 0015C5AFEA. It just added 01 onto the front of that. That's considered the client ID. You can ignore that. But behind here, I can see that's the MAC address that matches this, and our DHCP server is working successfully. That is setting up the DHCP server using SDM, and that is the final piece that we want to cover. Last thing we should probably do is go back into the SDM, click that save guy. It says you've chosen to copy the running config to the startup config. This may take some time. Do you want to continue? I'll hit no because I just want to show you in the SDM, when you go back, oh, they don't have it in this one. Anyway, in some SDM versions, they'll have a little key down here. It'll have a little disk with an exclamation point over it that will tell you if you need to save your config or not. Or when you exit the SDM, it'll say you haven't saved your config yet. But right here it says this may take some time. Do you want to continue? Sure. And it is now copying the running config to the startup config. So we have now saved our configuration and we're good to go. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.